A busy airport terminal is a place of chaos and order coexisting, a symphony of announcements, hurried footsteps, and the hum of conversations blending into a single, unrelenting noise. On this particular day, the atmosphere at Gate 23 was no different. People bustled about, some clutching steaming cups of coffee, others dragging carry-on bags behind them with the weary look of seasoned travelers. Among them was Celeste, a striking woman in her early 40s, with a confident stride and an aura that turned heads wherever she went. She was dressed sharply in a tailored pantsuit, her natural curls bouncing with every step, exuding a kind of self-assurance that made it impossible not to notice her. Celeste wasn't just any passenger. She was a self-made entrepreneur, a powerhouse in the tech industry, and the embodiment of resilience. Born and raised in a small town where opportunities were scarce, she had clawed her way up the ladder through grit, intelligence, and an unyielding determination to succeed. But today, she wasn't here to close a $1 million deal or unveil a groundbreaking product. She was simply trying to catch a flight home after a long week of business meetings. As she approached the gate, Celeste noticed the flight attendant, a young woman with meticulously styled blonde hair and a name tag that read Rebecca, giving her a once-over. It wasn't the kind of look that travelers usually got, welcoming or polite. Instead, it was scrutinizing, a fleeting expression of suspicion that lingered just long enough to be felt. Celeste brushed it off. She had experienced this too many times before to let it get under her skin. Being a Black woman in spaces where she was often the minority, she was no stranger to these subtle, unspoken judgments. Still, the tension in Rebecca's gaze was palpable. As Celeste handed over her boarding pass, Rebecca hesitated, her eyes darting to the screen in front of her. "Is there a problem?" Celeste asked, her tone calm but firm. Rebecca's response was curt, almost dismissive. "Just a moment." Without another word, she picked up her phone, her voice low but urgent as she whispered into the receiver. The minutes that followed felt like hours. Passengers began to notice the exchange, their curiosity piqued. Celeste stood her ground, refusing to let the growing stares rattle her. Then, out of nowhere, two uniformed police officers appeared, their presence cutting through the crowd like a knife. Rebecca pointed in Celeste's direction, her words inaudible, but her intent unmistakable. Celeste felt a wave of indignation rise within her. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, being treated as if she had committed a crime. "Is there a problem?" she asked again, this time addressing the officers directly. One of them, a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor, replied, "Ma'am, we received a report of suspicious activity. We need to ask you a few questions." The scene was unfolding like something out of a bad dream. Passengers whispered among themselves, some taking out their phones to record the confrontation. Celeste, however, remained composed. Years of navigating a world that often underestimated her had taught her the power of poise. "Suspicious activity," she repeated, her voice steady. "Can you be more specific?" Rebecca interjected, her tone laced with feigned concern. She was acting strangely and making other passengers uncomfortable, she claimed. Celeste's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Uncomfortable? By standing in line and handing you my boarding pass?" Her words cut through the air, drawing the attention of even more onlookers. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure how to proceed. Celeste could see the doubt flicker in their eyes, but Rebecca wasn't done. "She's been behaving erratically," she insisted, doubling down on her fabricated narrative. Celeste's heart pounded, not out of fear, but out of frustration at the blatant injustice of it all. As the officers continued to question her, Celeste's mind raced. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of something much bigger, a system that allowed baseless accusations to be weaponized against people who looked like her. And yet, even in the midst of this humiliating ordeal, a part of her knew that she wouldn't let this moment define her. The tension reached its breaking point when one of the officers finally said, "Ma'am, you're free to go," but the damage had already been done. Rebecca's face twisted in disappointment as if she had expected a different outcome. Celeste, however, didn't bother to dignify her with a response. Instead, she turned to the crowd, her voice ringing out with clarity and strength. For those of you recording, make sure you captured this too. The baseless accusations, the misuse of authority, and the blatant attempt to humiliate me for no reason other than someone's prejudice. As she walked away, her heart still pounding, Celeste made a silent bow. This wasn't over. She had the resources, the influence, and most importantly, the will to make sure no one else had to endure what she just did. What happened next would not only change her life, but also send shockwaves through the very institution that had failed her so spectacularly. What Celeste didn't know yet was that this moment of humiliation was about to become the catalyst for something extraordinary, something that would leave everyone, including Rebecca, utterly speechless. Celeste's heels clicked sharply against the polished floor as she moved through the terminal, but her mind was louder than the sound of her steps. The humiliation still clung to her like a second skin. Every glance from a passing traveler felt like it carried judgment, even if most people had already turned their attention elsewhere. Her phone buzzed in her hand, but she ignored it. She needed a moment to breathe, to process what had just happened. She found a quiet corner near a row of windows overlooking the runway and leaned against the cool glass. The planes moved with mechanical precision, taking off and landing without hesitation, oblivious to the chaos of human emotions inside the airport. Celeste envied that simplicity. Her phone buzzed again. This time she glanced at the screen. Her assistant, Maya, was calling. Celeste hesitated but answered, her voice more steady than she expected. "Hey, Maya." "Celeste? I just saw a video of you online. Are you okay? What happened?" Maya's voice was filled with concern. Celeste sighed, rubbing her temple. Of course, someone recorded it. It's all over social media. People are furious. They're calling for the airline to make a statement. What exactly happened? Celeste briefly explained the situation, keeping her tone even. Some flight attendant decided I looked suspicious, and next thing I knew, the police were questioning me at the gate. Nothing came of it, but the damage was done. Maya was silent for a moment, then spoke cautiously. "Do you want me to handle this? We could issue a statement or reach out to the airline for an apology." Celeste shook her head, though Maya couldn't see her. "No, not yet. An apology won't change anything. This is bigger than me. It's about how easily people like me are targeted for no reason. I need to think about my next move." There was a pause on the other end. "Whatever you need, I'm here. Just say the word." "I know. Thanks, Maya." Celeste ended the call and stared out at the tarmac, her mind racing. An apology from the airline would be hollow. It wouldn't erase the humiliation, and it wouldn't stop this from happening to someone else. She wasn't interested in a public relations stunt. She wanted change. Real, tangible change. But how? Her mind drifted to the airport itself. The endless hallways, the bustling gates, the cold, impersonal atmosphere. This wasn't just about Rebecca, the flight attendant. It was about the entire system that allowed someone like Rebecca to act on prejudice without consequence. The airport was a machine, and people like Celeste were merely pieces it moved around. But what if she wasn't just a piece? Celeste's eyes narrowed as a thought took root. A bold, impossible idea. What if she could control the machine? What if she owned it? She almost laughed at the thought. Airports weren't for sale, not like that. But Celeste wasn't one to dismiss impossible ideas. Her entire career had been built on turning impossible into reality. She founded her tech company in a one-bedroom apartment, fought tooth and nail for funding, and built it into a multi-million-dollar empire. People had doubted her every step of the way, and yet here she was. Her phone buzzed again, this time with notifications flooding in. Tweets, news alerts, messages from friends and colleagues. The story was spreading. Hashtags were trending. People were demanding accountability. Celeste scrolled through the comments. Some expressed outrage, others shared their own experiences of discrimination in public spaces. One comment caught her eye. Asterisk, "This is why we need more Black ownership in these industries. Tired of us being mistreated in spaces we don't control." Asterisk. The words struck her. Ownership, control. That was the key. Her mind shifted gears, moving from anger to strategy. Airports were complex businesses, often operated by a mix of public and private entities, But private companies managed many of the daily operations, security firms, airlines, concession stands. And some airports had private investors. Maybe she couldn't buy the entire airport, but she could buy into the system, influence it from the inside. Celeste straightened up, her pulse quickening. This wasn't impossible. Not for her. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed information, connections, and a plan. Her fingers moved swiftly as she called Maya back. Maya, I need you to do something for me. Of course. What is it? Find out who owns the management contracts for this airport. I want to know every company involved, from security to retail to operations, and check if any of it is privately owned or open to investment. Maya paused, clearly surprised. Wait, are you serious? Celeste, are you thinking about buying into the airport? I'm not thinking about it, Celeste said, her voice like steel. I'm going to do it. The silence on the line was thick. Then Maya let out a breathy laugh. Wow. Okay, I'll start digging. I'll have something for you soon. Good. And Maya? Yeah? Don't tell anyone, not yet. Celeste hung up and took a deep breath. The idea seemed ridiculous, even to her. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. If she wanted real change, she had to be in a position of power. Ownership was power. Influence was power. But power didn't come without enemies. She knew this wouldn't be easy. The companies that ran these operations weren't going to hand over control without a fight. There would be red tape, backdoor deals, and people who didn't want someone like her breaking into their world. Celeste looked back toward the gate where it all started. Rebecca was probably continuing her shift, unaware that she had just set something much larger in motion. Celeste wasn't angry anymore. She was focused. And that was far more dangerous. Somewhere deep in the maze of the airport, a manager reviewed the growing social media backlash. Flights were delayed, customer service lines flooded with complaints. The incident wasn't going away. But Celeste wasn't worried about public outrage. She was preparing to change the game entirely. The airport seemed to hum with a different energy now. The incident with Celeste had spread beyond just a viral video. It was becoming a conversation, a spark igniting something larger. But inside the staff-only corridors of that airport, there was a different kind of tension brewing. Rebecca sat in the break room, her hands wrapped tightly around a lukewarm cup of coffee. The incident replayed in her mind, but it felt different now. That initial smugness she felt was replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. She hadn't expected the situation to spiral like this. She thought it would be routine, report something suspicious, and security would handle it. But now, her face was all over the internet, and people were calling her actions racist, discriminatory. Her manager, a stocky man named Greg, stormed into the room. His face was flushed, not from exertion, but from frustration. Rebecca, what the hell did you do? He hissed, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. I followed protocol. She was acting strange, Rebecca stammered, her grip tightening on the cup. Strange? Do you know who that was? Greg leaned in, lowering his voice. That woman is Celeste Harris, CEO of a tech company worth millions. She's not some random passenger. Now corporate is breathing down my neck because your little suspicion blew up into a PR nightmare. Rebecca's face paled. She hadn't known. She hadn't cared, really. But now the weight of her decision was crashing down on her. What do I do? She whispered. Greg shook his head. Nothing. Stay quiet. Don't talk to anyone about this. Legal is handling it. And pray this doesn't cost both of us our jobs. Meanwhile, Celeste sat in her sleek penthouse apartment, the city's skyline glittering behind her. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected her thoughtful expression as she stared at the reports Maya had sent over. The airport was owned by a mix of city governance and private investors. But what caught her attention was the private management company overseeing daily operations, Attendant International, a powerful corporation with deep roots in transportation infrastructure. They handled security contracts, vendor agreements, and operational logistics for several major airports. But Attendant International wasn't untouchable. Celeste leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the financial breakdown Maya had highlighted. Attendant was stretched thin. Recent acquisitions had drained their liquidity, and rumors of internal power struggles made them vulnerable. A perfect opportunity. Her phone buzzed again. Maya's name lit up the screen. Celeste, I found something. Attendant International is struggling financially. There's talk they might spin off some of their airport contracts to cover debts. Celeste smiled faintly. That's exactly what I needed to hear. But it won't be easy. Attendant has deep connections. They won't give up control without a fight, Maya warned. They don't need to give up control, Celeste replied smoothly. I just need a seat at the table. But it wasn't just Attendant International she needed to consider. Behind the corporate walls of Attendant, its CEO, Charles Whitman, was already aware of the brewing storm. A stern man in his late 50s, Charles had built Attendant into a transportation empire. He wasn't about to let public backlash threaten his company's grip on airport operations. He stood in his office, staring at a news report covering Celeste's incident. His assistant, Lydia, waited nervously by the door. Get me everything on Celeste Harris, Charles said coldly. Her business dealings, partnerships, weaknesses. If she's coming for Attendant, I want to know before she makes her first move. Lydia hesitated. Sir, the board is already worried. Maybe issuing a statement or. Charles cut her off with a glare. We don't apologize for doing our job. We control the narrative. And I'll be damned if some tech executive thinks she can walk into my industry and dictate terms. He turned back to the screen, watching Celeste's poised response to the media. She was calm, collected, a direct threat. But Charles wasn't the only one watching. The incident had also caught the attention of Marcus Reed, a well-known activist and founder of a nonprofit organization focused on racial equity in corporate spaces. Marcus had been advocating for minority ownership in industries historically closed off to people of color. The airport incident was the perfect case to spotlight. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Get me in touch with Celeste Harris, he told his assistant. If she's serious about making a change, we need to stand with her. This isn't just about one woman's experience. It's about breaking a system designed to exclude us. Celeste was unaware of Marcus's interest, but she wasn't naive. She knew that taking on an industry giant like Attendant would stir the waters. Allies would come forward, but so would enemies. Her thoughts were interrupted by another call, this time from her attorney, Vanessa Brooks. Celeste, I've been reviewing the contracts Attendant holds with the city. There's a loophole. If public safety is compromised or if there's evidence of discriminatory practices by contractors, the city can terminate those agreements. Celeste's mind clicked into motion. So if the city believes Attendant fosters discrimination, they could lose their contract. In theory, yes. But proving that won't be easy, Vanessa cautioned. I don't need to prove anything right now. I just need to apply pressure, Celeste said, her tone sharp with intent. The pieces were moving. Attendant International was vulnerable, and Celeste was gathering ammunition. But the deeper she dug, the more dangerous this became. Attendant wasn't just a company. It was tied to political figures, wealthy investors, and hidden alliances. And now Celeste was a threat. Charles Whitman wasn't going to sit back and let her dismantle his empire. Rebecca, hiding behind corporate protection, feared the fallout. And Marcus Reed was ready to rally public support. Celeste was stepping into a game much bigger than herself. And this was only the beginning. The city skyline was cloaked in the fading glow of twilight as Celeste stood by her window, watching the lights flicker on one by one. The air in her penthouse was tense, every shadow seeming heavier than usual. Her mind wasn't here, though. It was deep in strategy. Attendant International was more than just a company. It was a fortress, and every move she made was being watched. Her phone rang, slicing through the silence. It was Maya. They know Celeste. Maya's voice was urgent. Attendant's people are scrambling. Their legal team is quietly reviewing contracts, and rumor has it Charles Whitman is meeting with city officials tomorrow. They're trying to cut off any chance you have to challenge their hold on the airport. Celeste's eyes narrowed. Good. That means they're scared. Scared, yes, but dangerous too. And there's more. Rebecca, the flight attendant, she's lawyering up. I think Attendant's using her as a shield. If this goes public, they'll spin it like she was just a low-level employee acting alone. Celeste let out a slow breath. They won't bury this that easily. But Maya wasn't finished. Marcus Reed wants to meet. He's offering support, but he's also pushing for a press conference. He thinks now's the time to go public. Celeste hesitated. Going public now could force Arden into a corner, but it would also expose her to attacks she wasn't fully prepared for. Charles Whitman had resources, money, influence, and the kind of corporate power that could ruin reputations with a single headline. Yet waiting too long could let Arden regroup. "I'll meet him," Celeste said finally. "Set it up." That night, in a dimly lit cafe tucked away in the city's industrial district, Celeste sat across from Marcus Reed. He was exactly as she expected, confident, charismatic, and driven. His eyes burned with purpose. "This isn't just about you, Celeste," Marcus said, leaning forward. "It's about every Black person who's been humiliated, dismissed, or outright excluded from places like that airport. If we move together, this becomes more than a fight for ownership. It becomes a fight for systemic change." Celeste studied him. His passion was real, but she also sensed his eagerness to put her at the front of a much bigger movement. She respected that, but she wasn't interested in being anyone's symbol. "I understand what's at stake, Marcus," she replied calmly. "But I need to be strategic. Arden won't just crumble because the public is angry. They're already working behind the scenes to protect themselves." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's why we hit them where it hurts, public perception. If we can get the city council to question Arden's contracts, their investors will panic. Public pressure can make that happen." Celeste's mind raced. She needed more than just public outrage. She needed leverage. "I have something better," she said, her voice steady. "Arden's been cutting corners on their security protocols. I have proof." Documents Maya found. Arden outsourced security screenings to a third-party company that's been flagged for negligence. If that information reaches the right people, it won't just be a PR issue. It'll be a legal one. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. That's the kind of ammunition that could bring them down. "But if we go public with it, they'll know exactly where it came from," Celeste added. "They'll come after me harder than ever." Marcus leaned back, considering this. "Are you ready for that?" Celeste's answer was immediate. "I didn't get here by backing down." Meanwhile, inside Arden International's sleek headquarters, Charles Whitman stood in his office, staring at a wall of monitors. News coverage of the airport incident played on one screen, while another showed social media trends climbing steadily against his company. Lydia, his assistant, entered quietly. "Sir, there's chatter that Celeste Harris has evidence of our security breaches. If that goes public..." Charles cut her off with a wave of his hand. "It won't. I've already taken care of it." Lydia hesitated. "How?" Charles turned slowly, his face calm but deadly serious. "We're going to discredit her. Make her look unstable, reckless. We'll leak stories about her being difficult to work with, maybe even hint at financial instability in her company. People will question her motives." Lydia's eyes flickered with discomfort. "That's risky. If it backfires..." "It won't," Charles snapped. "By the time she realizes what's happening, her credibility will be in shambles. No one will care what evidence she has." But Charles had underestimated Celeste's resilience. Later that night, Celeste received a call from Vanessa, her lawyer. "Celeste, we have a problem," Vanessa said grimly. "There are rumors circulating about your company. Whispers of financial instability, claims you're under investigation for fraud. None of it's true, but it's spreading fast." Celeste closed her eyes, letting the anger wash over her before it hardened into resolve. "That's Whitman," she said. "He's trying to destroy my reputation before I can move against him." "We need to act fast," Vanessa urged. "If these rumors gain traction, investors might pull out. You need to either fight back publicly or find a way to shut this down." Celeste stood in the middle of her living room, the city lights casting long shadows around her. "I'm done playing defense," she said, more to herself than anyone else. The next morning, the city awoke to headlines blasting across every major news outlet. An anonymous source had leaked Arden International's security violations. Documents exposing their negligent practices and ties to shady contractors were now public knowledge. Charles Whitman slammed his fist onto his desk when the news broke. His carefully constructed wall of control was cracking. Phones were ringing off the hook. Investors were demanding answers. The city council announced an emergency meeting to review Arden's contracts. But even as Arden scrambled, Celeste knew this wasn't over. Charles wouldn't go down without a fight, and Celeste was now in the center of a battle that had grown far bigger than she anticipated. The tension was suffocating, each side pushing closer to a confrontation that could shatter everything. And neither of them was willing to back down. The city was in turmoil. News of Arden International security violations spread like wildfire, dominating headlines and sparking outrage. Social media exploded with demands for accountability, and city officials scrambled to address the growing scandal. Celeste watched the chaos unfold with a quiet intensity, knowing this was the moment she had been pushing toward. But victory still felt distant, as if something was lurking just beyond her grasp. Her phone buzzed. It was Maya again, her voice low and tight. "Celeste, we have a serious problem. I dug deeper into Arden's finances like you asked, and I found something we didn't expect." Celeste straightened. "What is it?" "Arden isn't just managing the airport. They've been secretly funneling money into offshore accounts. But that's not the worst part." Maya hesitated, as if weighing whether to say it. "Spit it out, Maya." "They're buying up smaller security firms under shell companies. One of those firms, it's directly linked to city council members. Arden's been bribing officials to keep their contracts secure." Celeste's heart pounded. This wasn't just corporate greed, it was corruption on a scale far bigger than she'd imagined. Arden wasn't simply a corporation protecting its bottom line. They were deeply entangled with the very people Celeste was relying on to hold them accountable. She turned away from the window, pacing. If the city council is compromised, they're never going to terminate Arden's contracts. This whole thing could collapse. Maya's voice dropped even lower. "It gets worse. One of those council members, Councilman Grayson, has been feeding Arden information about your moves. They know more than we thought." Celeste froze. She had been careful, strategic, but now it was clear that Arden had been one step ahead, watching her every move from inside the system. "How long have they known?" she asked, her voice a thin thread. "I don't know," Maya admitted. "But they're preparing something. I can feel it." Across the city, Charles Whitman stood in a high-rise office, his face unreadable as he stared out over the chaos he had quietly unleashed. Lydia entered the room, holding a tablet displaying the latest news. "The board is demanding answers. Investors are threatening to pull funding. This leak hit harder than we expected." Charles didn't move. "Let them panic. We're already moving on to the next phase." Lydia hesitated. "Are you sure about this? If it leaks, it could destroy everything." Charles turned, his expression cold. "Celeste Harris thinks she's exposed me, but she has no idea how deep this goes. If she wants a war, she'll get one." Later that night, Celeste received an encrypted message from an unknown source. The message contained a single video file. Against her better judgment, she opened it. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy surveillance footage from weeks ago, inside her own office. It was her, sitting at her desk, reviewing the very security documents that had just gone public. A voice, distorted and cold, echoed through the speakers. "You think you're safe, Celeste? You think exposing Arden will make us crumble? We built this city. We own the people you trust. Walk away or watch it all burn." The screen went black. Celeste stared in shock. Someone had been inside her office, watching her, recording her. Panic rose in her chest, but it was quickly overtaken by something sharper: anger. They were trying to intimidate her, to make her doubt herself, but it only fueled her resolve. She called Maya immediately. "They were in my office. Arden's watching me, closer than we thought." Maya's breath caught. "Celeste, this is bigger than corporate sabotage. They're sending a warning. They might come after you personally." Celeste's mind raced. The threat wasn't just about her company anymore. It was about her safety, her reputation, Across the
and
city,
everyone connected
Marcus
to
Reed
her.
was facing his
But backing
own dilemma.
down wasn't an
He
option.
had just received an
"They want me
anonymous
to be
tip warning
scared,"
him to
she said
sever ties
quietly.
with Celeste,
"But fear
or risk
isn't
his
going to
nonprofit
stop me.
being
It's going
investigated
to
for
destroy
fraud.
them."
It was a thinly veiled threat, but it was enough to shake him. He paced his office, debating his next move. Supporting Celeste had always been about pushing for systemic change, but now it was clear that powerful forces were willing to ruin anyone who stood in their way. His phone vibrated. It was Celeste. "They're targeting you too, aren't they?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Marcus sighed. "Yeah, they're not playing games." Celeste's tone didn't waver. "Neither are we." But in the shadows, Charles Whitman had set his final plan in motion. Arden's legal team was preparing to file a massive lawsuit against Celeste for defamation, slander, and corporate espionage. The goal wasn't to win, it was to drain her resources, tie her up in legal battles, and bleed her dry. But Charles had another weapon. He had quietly arranged for a smear campaign, planting false stories about Celeste's company engaging in unethical practices overseas. Fake employee testimonies, falsified reports, and anonymous accusations began circulating in media circles, ready to explode. Celeste didn't know it yet, but her fight was about to become a full-blown war on every front. The walls were closing in. Every move she made now had consequences, and Arden International was prepared to destroy everything she had built. The city was buzzing with tension. News outlets couldn't keep up with the flood of reports on Arden International's security violations and the whispers of corruption spreading through City Hall. Celeste stood in front of a packed press conference, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward her. Her heart pounded, but her face remained calm, collected. "This isn't just about me," Celeste's voice rang out. "This is about a system designed to silence voices like mine. Arden International thinks they can buy silence and manipulate power. But today, that ends." The room erupted with questions, but Celeste didn't flinch. She had proof. Maya had uncovered not just the security breaches but the offshore accounts, the bribery, and the council members secretly profiting from Arden's contracts. The evidence was airtight. Documents, recordings, financial records, all publicly released in real time. Charles Whitman watched the press conference from his office, his face pale for the first time. His empire was crumbling. Calls from board members went unanswered. His legal team was scrambling, but the damage was done. Yet Charles wasn't finished. Lydia rushed in, panic in her eyes. "Sir, there's something you need to see." She handed him a tablet, showing footage leaked to the media, footage of Charles himself in a private meeting with Councilman Grayson, exchanging what looked unmistakably like a bribe. Charles's grip tightened on the tablet. "Who leaked this?" he demanded. Lydia swallowed. "We don't know. It wasn't Celeste." Charles' eyes narrowed. Someone else was pulling strings. Back at the press conference, Celeste's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from an unknown number. Asterisk, asterisk, "We helped you. Now it's your move." Asterisk, asterisk. Confused but undeterred, Celeste finished the press event. Minutes later, news broke that the city council was launching a full investigation into Arden International. Contracts were frozen. The airport deal was under review. Celeste should have felt victorious, but the message haunted her. Someone had intervened. "You need to turn
Someone
on the
with
news."
access Charles
She
didn't
flipped on the
expect.
TV. Later
A
that
breaking
evening,
story
Marcus
blared
called. Across the screen. Asterisk, asterisk, anonymous whistleblower exposes Arden CEO's ties to criminal syndicate. Asterisk, asterisk. Celeste stared in disbelief. Arden wasn't just corrupt. They had deep-rooted connections to criminal networks laundering money through shell companies. It was far bigger than anyone imagined. But who exposed it? Her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Asterisk, asterisk, Whitman was never your real enemy. You've only scratched the surface. Asterisk, asterisk. Her stomach dropped. The fight with Arden had been just one battle. Somewhere in the shadows, a larger force was watching, manipulating. Celeste realized she hadn't won the war. She had only been allowed to win this fight. And whoever had helped her would come collecting soon.